My dad didn't look at me when I asked for the money. He just kept staring at the table like the answer was written somewhere in the wood. I remember thinking he was trying to calculate it. 3 years. Every month. The exact number was already in my head. I had it saved. Organized. Planned. I had even brought the spreadsheet with me. So I waited. Because this was supposed to be the easy part. I had done everything right. Then my mom said, "There isn't anything to give you." Just like that.
Calm. Certain.
Like I had misunderstood something simple. I thought she meant not all of it. Or not yet. So I asked again. And that's when she said something I didn't expect. "We used it." Used it. 3 years of saving just gone. Not stolen. Not lost. Just spent. And that was the moment I realized the plan I had built my future around had never actually existed in the first place. Because to understand how you can lose something you never technically had, you need to know how carefully I thought I was doing everything right. Moving back in with my parents wasn't something I had planned. Not in the way people plan things carefully. It was more a decision that made sense when you lined everything up properly. I had just finished university, started working as a nurse, long shifts, early mornings that started before it was light, evenings that ended when everything already felt closed for the day. And the money was fine, not bad, not unstable, just not enough to move forward quickly. I could have rented. I knew that. A small place, something basic. But it would have meant staying in the same position for longer, paying out every month without anything building underneath it. So when my parents suggested I move back in, it didn't feel like going backwards. It felt like choosing something properly. We sat at the kitchen table when they explained it. Same place we had always had serious conversations. My mom had that tone she uses when something is already decided to be reasonable. "We don't want you wasting money on rent," she said. "You can stay here, contribute a bit each month, and we'll put it aside for you." She said it simply, like it was obvious. Like this was the natural thing to do. "A deposit," my dad added, "for when you're ready to buy." And I remember how that landed. Not just helpful. Structured. Like there was a clear path now. A timeline. An outcome. Something I could work toward without guessing. I didn't hesitate. There wasn't anything to question. It was their idea, their plan. And it made sense in every way I understood things. So we agreed on an amount. Not too high. Just enough to feel like a real contribution. Enough that it mattered. From the very first month, I treated it seriously. I set up the transfer myself. Same date every month. Same amount. No variation. No delays. And I tracked it, not because I didn't trust them. That never even crossed my mind. But because I'm the kind of person who keeps track of things. I like seeing progress. I like knowing where I am in something. So I built a spreadsheet. Nothing complicated. Just clean. Organized. Every payment logged. Every total updated. Month after month. And slowly it grew. Not quickly, but steadily. And that was better. Because steady meant reliable. Reliable meant real. Living at home was predictable. Not always comfortable, but manageable. There's a rhythm to living in a house that isn't fully yours. Small adjustments. Unspoken rules. Things that don't need to be said because they've always been that way. And I fit into that. Quietly. Without resistance. Because I had a reason to be there. A purpose. Something I was actively building toward. My brother Liam was still there too. Same room. Same habits. Same lack of urgency about anything. He worked occasionally. Took shifts here and there. But he didn't contribute regularly. Not in the way I did. No one pushed him on it. Not directly. It wasn't a conversation. It was just understood. I paid. He didn't. And that was normal. At least in that house. At least for them. I noticed it. Of course I did. But I didn't let it sit too long. Because my situation was different. I wasn't just living there. I was building something. Every shift I worked, every weekend I gave up, every time I stayed late when I didn't have to, it all connected back to that number, growing quietly in my spreadsheet. Sometimes my mom would mention it, not in detail,
Just small comments.
"You're doing really well. Keep going like this, and you'll have something solid soon." And I believed her.
Completely.
Because there was no reason not to. The arrangement had been clear. The purpose had been shared. And I had held up my side of it. Every month. Without exception. 3 years passed like that. Not quickly, but consistently. The kind of time that doesn't feel long until you look back and realize how much of yourself you placed inside it. The number in my spreadsheet became something fixed in my mind. Not just money, but discipline, consistency, proof that I had done things properly. And then one evening after a long shift, still in my uniform, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, I found a property listing that felt different. Not just interesting, possible. I looked at the price, ran the numbers, opened my spreadsheet,
Checked the total again.
slowly this time. And for the first time in 3 years, everything aligned. Not almost. Not eventually.
Now.
I was ready. Properly ready. I booked a mortgage appointment the next morning. Sat there for a second after confirming it. Just letting it settle. Because this was the part everything had been leading toward. And that was when it shifted. Quietly.
Completely.
Because for the first time, I wasn't just saving anymore. I was about to ask for something I thought already belonged to me. I didn't go to them immediately. Not that night. Even though I could have. Even though everything in me wanted to move forward as quickly as possible. I waited. Not out of hesitation. Just because I wanted to do it properly. That's how I had done everything up to that point. Carefully. In order.
Step by step.
The mortgage appointment came first. I took a day off work. Went in with everything prepared. Payslips, bank statements, my spreadsheet.
Printed. Organized.
I remember sitting there across from the advisor, walking through my finances calmly, answering questions, explaining the plan. And when we got to the deposit, I felt something shift in the conversation. In a good way.
That's a solid amount, he said.
Looking at the number.
Nodding.
That puts you in a strong position. Strong. That word stayed with me. Because that's what the last 3 years had been about. Building something solid enough to stand on. When I left that appointment, I felt settled. Not excited in a loud way. Just certain. Everything was where it needed to be. There was nothing unclear anymore.
Just one step left.
That evening I went home. Same as always. Same routine. Shoes off.
Bag down.
The quiet familiarity of a place I had lived in long enough to move through without thinking. My mom was in the kitchen. My dad in the living room. Liam somewhere upstairs. Nothing unusual. Nothing different. And that almost made it easier. Because this didn't feel like a big moment. It felt like the natural next step in something we had all agreed on. I waited until after dinner. Not because I was nervous. Just because that's when conversations like this happen. When everything is settled. When people are sitting, listening, available. I brought my laptop with me. Not as proof. Just because it was part of how I had done things. I sat down at the table. They both looked at me, expecting something, but not expecting this. "I had my mortgage appointment today," I said. Simple.
Come.
My mom smiled immediately.
That's great, she said.
My dad nodded. "About time," he added lightly. There was a pause. Comfortable. Normal. And then I continued. "I'm ready to move forward," I said. Still steady. Still clear. "I'll need the deposit." I didn't phrase it like a question. Because it wasn't one. It was just the next step. The logical continuation of everything we had already built. I opened my laptop. Turned it slightly toward them. Not pushing it. Just there. I've kept track of everything, I said. Not defensive, just factual. My mom glanced at the screen briefly, then back at me, and something in her expression shifted. Not dramatically, just slightly, like she was adjusting to something she hadn't expected to face directly. My dad didn't look at the laptop at all. He stayed where he was, hands resting on the table,
Eyes down.
and that was the first moment something felt off. Not wrong, just out of alignment. I waited, because this wasn't complicated. There wasn't anything to explain. They knew the arrangement. They had set it up. This was just the part where it came back. But the silence lasted longer than it should have. Not uncomfortable, just stretched. And then my mom said, "We need to talk about that. About that. Not the deposit. Not the money. That." I closed the laptop slowly, not reacting, just noticing. About what? I asked. Still calm, still measured. She glanced at my dad.
Quick.
Like checking something. Then back at me. "It's not exactly how you think," she said. That sentence didn't land fully at first, because it didn't make sense. There wasn't anything to interpret. There wasn't anything unclear. It was just numbers.
Time.
Agreement. "I don't understand," I said. And I meant that literally, not emotionally, just factually, because I didn't. My dad shifted slightly in his chair, still not looking up. My mom exhaled, then said it again.
Slower this time.
"We don't have it saved like that." That was the moment the ground shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Because something that had always felt fixed started to feel undefined. I didn't respond immediately, not because I didn't have words, but because I needed a second to place what I was hearing into something real. "What do you mean?" I asked, still steady, still controlled.
She hesitated, just briefly.
Then, "We've been using it," she said. Using it. That word landed differently this time. Heavier. Because now it wasn't vague anymore. It was specific.
Active. Ongoing.
I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic. Not anger. Just clarity beginning to form. "For what?" I asked. And even as I said it, I already knew the answer wasn't going to be simple. My mom didn't answer right away. She looked at me, then at the table, then back at me again, like she was deciding how much to say, or how to say it in a way that would land better. "It just went into the house," she said finally. Into the house. That phrase sounded soft, general, like it covered everything without naming anything. "What does that mean?" I asked.
Still calm.
Still steady. Because I needed something specific. Something I could actually understand. "Bills, things like that," she said. "Food, utilities, you know how it is." I did know how it was. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, that wasn't what we had agreed to. "That's not what we said," I replied. Not louder. Not emotional. Just clear. She exhaled slightly, like I was making something more complicated than it needed to be. "You were living here," she said. "You were using everything too." There it was. The shift. Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding. A redefinition. Quiet. Confident. Already decided. "I was paying you," I said. "And you said you were saving it." My dad shifted again. Still not looking up. Still not stepping in. Just present. But not involved. My mom's expression tightened slightly. Not defensive. Just firmer. "We needed the money," she said. Like that explained it. Like that made it reasonable. I felt something settle further. Not rising. Not reacting. Just narrowing. "For 3 years?" I asked. She didn't answer that directly. "It wasn't like we planned it," she said. "It just happened." That word again. Happened. Like something passive. Like something that drifted into place without choice.
But it didn't feel passive.
It felt consistent. Monthly.
Structured.
The same way I had been structured, except in a completely different direction. I opened my laptop again, turned it toward them, not aggressively, just placing it back into the conversation. This is every payment, I said. Every month. I scrolled slowly, let the numbers move down the screen.
Dates.
Amounts. Totals. Everything clear. Everything recorded. This is what we agreed on, I added. My mom glanced at it, briefly, then looked away, like looking at it too long would make something harder to hold on to. That's your record, she said. Careful. Measured. Not dismissing it, but not accepting it either. That's what I paid, I replied. And that was the difference between what could be interpreted and what couldn't. My dad finally spoke, quietly, almost under his breath. We thought it would balance out. I looked at him, really looked this time, because that was the first honest sentence in the room. Balance out how? I asked. He didn't answer. Not directly. My mum stepped in again. You were staying here for less than market rent, she said. And we've always helped you when you needed it. Helped me. That word sat differently, because this had never been framed as help. It had been framed as structure, as a plan, as something we were building together. This wasn't help, I said. You told me it was for a deposit. There was a silence after that. Longer, heavier, because now we were back at the actual agreement. Not the version that had been reshaped over time, but the one that started everything. My mom didn't respond immediately. She looked at my dad again, then back at me. We didn't think you'd need it all at once, she said. And that was the moment it became completely clear. They hadn't forgotten. They hadn't misunderstood. They had assumed. Assumed time would stretch. Assumed I wouldn't ask yet. Assumed they could keep using it and figure it out later. Assumed I would adjust, like I always had. I leaned back slightly in my chair, hands resting in my lap, breathing steady, because now there was nothing unclear left. There isn't a savings account, is there? I asked. No accusation, just confirmation. My dad shook his head once. Small, almost invisible. No, he said. And that was it. 3 years. Reduced to a single word. Not lost. Not hidden. Just never set aside in the first place. I closed my laptop slowly. Not out of frustration. Just completion. Because I had everything I needed now. Not the money, but the truth. And the truth didn't require arguing. It required deciding what came next. I stood up, my chair scraping lightly against the floor. Neither of them stopped me. Neither of them tried to explain further, because there wasn't anything left to explain. I walked to the door, picked up my bag, and paused for a second, not to say anything, just to let the moment settle properly. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about something I had built carefully being treated like it had never existed. And once you see that clearly, you can't go back to how you used to respond. What would you do when the people you trusted most quietly rewrite an agreement you never questioned? I didn't go back into the kitchen. Not that night. Not to keep talking. Because there was nothing left to say in that space. Nothing that would change what had already been made clear. I left the house, got into my car, and just sat there for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, looking straight ahead. Not crying, not reacting, just thinking. Because this wasn't a situation that could be fixed with a conversation. Not quickly, not emotionally. They didn't have the money. That part was already clear. So, asking again wouldn't create it. Arguing wouldn't produce it. And I wasn't going to stand there explaining why it mattered. They knew why it mattered. They just hadn't treated it like it did. That was the difference. I drove without deciding where I was going at first. Just moving. Until I ended up parked outside a cafe I sometimes went to after late shifts. It was quiet. Almost empty. I went in, ordered something I didn't really want, and sat by the window. Phone on the table, laptop still in my bag. And for the first time since the conversation, I let myself go through it properly. Not what they said, but what it meant. 3 years. Every month. Every decision I made around that number. The shifts I picked up. The things I didn't spend money on. The way I planned everything around something that wasn't actually there. And underneath that, something else settled. Not just disappointment. Not just anger. Something more precise. A kind of clarity I hadn't had before. Because this wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about assumption. They assumed I wouldn't need it yet. They assumed they could use it and adjust later. They assumed I would understand. And I had spent 3 years assuming they were doing exactly what they said. That was the difference. 2 completely different assumptions, running side by side, until they collided. I took my laptop out, opened the spreadsheet again, looked at it differently this time. Not as progress, not as something growing, but as a record. A complete record. Every payment, every date, every total, unchanged, unarguable. And, for the first time, I understood what it actually was. Not a plan, not a future, a document, proof of something that had happened. And that mattered more now than it ever had before. I started writing. Not notes, not ideas, just listing it out clearly. Month 1.
Amount. Date.
Then the next. And the next. All the way down. No emotion. No commentary. Just facts. Because facts don't need to be defended. They don't shift. They don't soften. They just sit there. And once they're laid out properly, they're hard to ignore. I didn't rush it. I took my time, checked everything, made sure it was complete, accurate,
Clear.
because this wasn't something I was doing impulsively. This was the first step of something deliberate. When I finished, I sat back, looked at it, and realized something quietly. This wasn't about getting the money back immediately.
It couldn't be.
That wasn't possible. So the question wasn't how to recover it. The question was what I wanted from this now. An apology, recognition, a change, or something practical. Something that actually moved me forward. I closed the laptop slowly, because that answer didn't need to be rushed. But one thing was already clear. I wasn't going back to how things had been. Not the arrangement, not the assumptions, not the way everything sat quietly until it didn't. I picked up my phone, scrolled for a moment, then called someone I trusted. A friend from work. She handled money differently. Worked in finance before she switched careers. The kind of person who understood structure. Who didn't get lost in the emotional side of things. She answered on the second ring. And I told her everything. Not dramatically. Just clearly. The agreement. The payments. The conversation. The absence of the savings. She didn't interrupt. Just listened. And when I finished, there was a pause. Not uncomfortable. Just measured. Do you have records? She asked. I have everything, I said. And that was the first time that felt like something solid. Because having everything meant something could be done with it. Not emotionally.
Practically. Good, she said.
Then you're not in a weak position.
Weak.
That word stayed with me. Because that's what I had felt walking out of that house. Like something had been taken without any way to respond.
But she didn't see it that way.
And that shifted something. This isn't about arguing with them, she continued. It's about making the reality visible in a way they can't move around. I looked back at my laptop, at the list, at the structure of it. And I understood exactly what she meant. Because up until now, everything had existed in conversation, in memory, in interpretation. But once something is written clearly, it stops being flexible. It becomes fixed. I ended the call a few minutes later. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had direction. And direction was enough. I packed my things, walked out of the cafe, got back into my car. And this time, I knew exactly what I was doing next. I wasn't going back to argue. I wasn't going back to explain. I was going back with something they couldn't ignore. And once they saw it laid out properly, there would only be one question left to answer. I didn't go back the next day, or the day after, not because I was avoiding it, but because I wanted to be completely clear before I stepped into that conversation again. Clear in a way that didn't shift depending on how anyone reacted. I finished the document first. Every month, every transfer, every total.
Clean. Structured.
Nothing emotional attached to it. Just facts. I printed it. Not one copy. 3. One for each of them. Not to overwhelm. Just to make sure it couldn't be dismissed as something vague or open to interpretation. I looked at it for a long time before I left. Because I understood something now. This wasn't about proving I was right. That part was already obvious. It was about making it impossible for them to pretend they didn't understand what had happened. That was the difference. I drove over in the evening. Same time as before. Same house. Same quiet familiarity. But it felt different now. Not heavier. Just more defined. My mom was in the kitchen again. My dad at the table. Liam upstairs. Nothing had changed on the surface. And that almost made it easier. Because this wasn't about creating a moment. It was about finishing one. I need 10 minutes, I said. Simple.
Calm.
They both looked at me. Not defensive. Just cautious. I placed the papers on the table. One in front of each of them.
Didn't explain them.
Didn't walk them through it. I just sat down. And waited. My mom picked hers up first. Looked at the top. Then started reading.
Slowly.
Line by line. My dad followed a few seconds later. And the room went quiet. Not tense. Not uncomfortable. Just still. Because for the first time, this wasn't a conversation. It was something they had to look at. Fully. Without adjusting it. Without reframing it. Just as it was. I didn't interrupt. Didn't fill the silence. I let it sit. Because silence, when something is clear, does more than any explanation ever could. My mom reached the bottom first. Set the paper down.
Carefully.
Then looked at me. Her expression had changed. Not softened. Not defensive. Just aware. My dad was still reading. Even though there wasn't anything new left to read. Just going over it again.
Slower this time.
As if repetition would change something.
It didn't.
That's a lot of money, my mom said. And I noticed something immediately. Not we agreed to this. Not we used it. Just the number. It is, I said. And left it there. Because that wasn't the point. My dad finally put the paper down. But he didn't look at me. Not yet. He kept his hands resting on it. Like he needed something solid under them. We didn't think about it like that, my mom said. And that sentence landed exactly the way everything else had. Like something that had happened. Not something chosen. That's how it was, I replied. Not correcting. Just placing it back into reality. There was a pause. Longer this time. Heavier. Because now there was no space left to shift anything around. Everything was already there.
Clear. Complete.
Undeniable. My dad was the one who broke it. Not loudly. Not suddenly. Just quietly.
We'll sort it, he said.
Still not looking up. But the tone was different. Not dismissive. Not avoiding. Just decided. My mom turned to him slightly. Like she hadn't expected that. Frank, she started. But he shook his head once. Small. Final. No, he said. We'll sort it. And that was the first moment something actually moved. Not emotionally. Structurally. Because this wasn't about agreement anymore. It was about action.
How?
I asked. Not pushing. Just practical. He exhaled slowly. Finally looked at me. And for the first time since this started, he didn't look away. I'll speak to your uncle, he said. See what I can arrange. Arrange. That word mattered. Because it meant effort. Not assumption. Not delay. Movement. My mom didn't interrupt again. She stayed quiet, which, for her, said more than anything else could have. Because silence meant something had shifted out of her control. The next few weeks moved slowly. But they moved. My dad followed through, spoke to his brother, worked something out. Not immediately, not cleanly, but properly. Money started coming back. Not all at once. In parts. Each one tracked. Each one acknowledged. And I kept my spreadsheet open. Updated it again. But this time differently. Not as something I was building. As something being returned. It took months. Not everything came back. But enough did. Enough to move forward. Enough to make the next step real again. And through that process, something else changed. Not just the money. The structure of things. What was visible. What was assumed. Liam started contributing. Not because I said anything, but because the conversation had shifted, what could no longer be ignored. My mom became more careful, less certain in the way she framed things. My dad stayed consistent, quiet, but present in a way he hadn't been before. And I stopped adjusting around everything. That was the biggest change. I wasn't the easy one anymore. I was just clear. And once that happened, everything else had to shift with it. The first payment came through on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished a long shift.
Still in my uniform.
Sitting in my car outside the house before going in. Too tired to move straight away. Just checking my phone out of habit. And there it was. A transfer. From my dad. No message. No explanation. Just the amount. I stared at it for a second.
Not surprised.
Just letting it settle properly. Because up until that moment, everything had still felt slightly uncertain. Even after the conversation. Even after the document. Even after he said, "We'll sort it." But money in your account is different. It doesn't depend on tone. Or intention. Or interpretation. It just exists. And that made it real in a way nothing else had yet. I didn't go inside straight away. I stayed there.
Phone in my hand.
Looking at the number.
Not calculating it.
Just acknowledging it. Because this wasn't the full amount. Not even close. But it was something. And something meant movement. That night, I updated my spreadsheet. Opened it the same way I always had. But this time, I added a new column. Returned.
Simple. Clear.
No extra explanation. Because that's what it was now. Not savings. Not a plan. Just something coming back. I typed in the amount carefully. Watched the total adjust. And for the first time since everything fell apart, the number felt connected to reality again. Not what I thought it was, but what it actually was. The next payment came a couple of weeks later. Then another. Not on a schedule. Not predictable. Just when it could happen. Always from my dad. Never from my mom. And I noticed that. Not in a judgmental way. Just as something that was true. Because responsibility shows up differently depending on who's carrying it. We didn't talk about it much. Not directly. There were no long conversations. No attempts to revisit what had happened. No emotional unpacking. Just quiet progress. Measured. Visible. Real. Sometimes, my mom would mention something small. Ask if I had what I needed. If things were moving forward. But she didn't refer to the money. Not directly. And I didn't push her to. Because I had stopped expecting clarity from where it hadn't come before. I focused on what was actually happening. The transfers. The numbers. The movement. Each time I updated the spreadsheet, something settled further. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just stability. But a different kind of stability than before. Before, it was built on trust. Now, it was built on structure. And that difference stayed with me. It took a few months. Longer than I would have chosen. Longer than it should have taken. But it moved. Consistently enough to matter. And eventually the number reached the point where it worked again. Not the full amount, but enough. Enough to make the deposit real. Enough to move forward without waiting any longer. I booked another mortgage appointment.
Same office.
Same process. But I felt different walking into it. Less hopeful. More grounded. Because now I understood something I hadn't before. A plan only works if you're the one holding it, not just believing in it. Holding it. The appointment went smoothly. Numbers checked. Documents reviewed. Everything aligned. And when I signed the paperwork for the flat, it didn't feel dramatic. No big emotional release. No overwhelming moment. Just quiet confirmation. Like something that had taken longer than it should have, had finally settled where it belonged. I moved out a few weeks later. Packed everything slowly. Not rushed. Not sentimental. Just intentional. Room by room. Box by box. Closing something properly. My mom stood in the doorway while I carried the last things out. She didn't say much. Just asked if I had everything. I said yes. And that was enough. My dad helped with the heavier boxes. As usual. Silent, but present. And that mattered more than anything else he could have said. Liam stayed upstairs most of the time. Watching. Not involved. But about a week later, I heard he had started contributing.
Small amounts.
Nothing dramatic, but consistent. And I understood exactly why. Because once something becomes visible, it doesn't stay invisible again. The first night in my flat was quiet. Not lonely, just still. I didn't unpack straight away. I sat on the floor for a while, back against the wall, looking around at the space. Because this wasn't just somewhere new. It was something I had reached in a way I hadn't expected, not just through saving, but through understanding what I needed to protect. My relationship with my parents didn't end. It changed. Less assumption. Less unspoken expectation. More clarity. We still talk. Still see each other. But there's a boundary now. Not cold. Not distant. Just defined. And that makes everything easier. Because nothing important sits in that vague space anymore. Sometimes I still open the spreadsheet. Not out of habit. Just occasionally. I look at the original column. The total I thought I had. Then the returned column beside it. And I think about how something so simple ended up being the most important thing I did.
Not because it proved anything,
but because it made everything visible.
Clear.
Unavoidable. And once something is clear, it can actually change. I don't think about the money the way I used to. Not as something lost. Not as something taken. Just something that showed me where I needed to be more certain. More direct. More aware of what I was building and who was holding it. If you're relying on something important, make sure you're the one keeping track of it. Because clarity isn't something you get later. It's something you build from the beginning. And if stories like this feel familiar to you, you can subscribe for more. There's another one waiting for you right here.